Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Draco Sinister. This is the final chapter in this book before we move on to the last one in this trilogy. Now, before I get into the story proper today, there's a couple of housekeeping things I need to do. The first one is to say I'm sorry that this is coming out so late. April is my birth month, so I was taking some vacation time off for me from recording, and I think it's been really good. But I've also been sick off and on this month too, so you could probably hear it in my voice a little bit. And the second thing I want to address is a little bit heavier, so I do apologize if it's a bit of a downer before we start. But I did want to take a moment to address the last thing that has happened with J.K. Rowling, or she who must not be named, as a friend so graciously told me about, and I am now using that term. And this is very important to discuss because, for those of you that don't know, recently she who must not be named gave quite a bit of money to a cause that took away legislation and rights for trans people in the UK. So there is a lot to actually unpack with that subject, and I'm going to try to go through as many bullet points as I can. The first thing some people might be asking me is, well, J.K. Rowling has had these problems in the past. Why haven't you said anything before? And to that, I want to say that I foolishly, I suppose, had hope that she would have a wake-up call, that she would unpack her bigotry and be able to be moved to a more positive light. Because I always believe that we have the ability to do that. She did not, unfortunately. The other reason is because I am a very slow processor when it comes to things like this, and Harry Potter is one of those nostalgia books for me. It was such an integral part of the latter half of my tweens, and played a big part in my teenage years. So that is extremely hard to let go of. And also, it is very, very hard to come to grips with someone that you really admired their storytelling and made you want to write stories of your own. One of the people, anyway, has ideas and thoughts in their head that are not kind and nothing that you would align with yourself. That is very, very difficult pill to swallow. And I'm not the kind of person who takes every 10 seconds out of their day to post about it on social media, to tell people where I am in the process of letting go of J.K. Rowling and my nostalgia. That's not the kind of person that I am. I tend to do a lot of quiet reflection. Now, I know that a lot of people are saying that, there's other book series out there, there's other magic school series that you can get into, and that will replace Harry Potter. And I'm going to say something that is probably controversial, but I'm going to do it anyway. You cannot replace nostalgia. Nostalgia is something that we experience when we get older because we read things differently when we are children and we take them in differently as adults. Yes, there might be another magical school series out there for middle grade readers that could be better, if not more fantastical than Harry Potter, but you cannot rebuild nostalgia from the ground up. It's not something that you can do. Now, I do have a book series that is for middle grade readers that I recommend to everyone, and that is the Fairyland series by Catherine M. Valenti. And that is more of like a Wizard of Oz kind of storytelling as opposed to magic school. But at this point, it is probably going to, you know, take the place of Harry Potter in my heart. Just because I do love the author, and she is not a horrible, terrible person, to my knowledge. The other thing that I want to say on that is I think a lot of the reasons why people are holding on to the nostalgia of Harry Potter so tightly is because there is so little joy left at the moment for so many people currently, especially living in the United States right now, that they are holding on to whatever scraps make them happy. And I completely understand that. On the other hand, I also understand if people no longer want to engage with Harry Potter, but there are some people online at this very moment that are saying that to even engage with Harry Potter fan fiction is to promote She Who Must Not Be Named, and by extension Harry Potter, which I guess to their mind will lead people to purchasing the books and X, Y, and Z. I think that that is a really steep idea to take when it comes to art versus artist. And again, that is a completely different conversation, which is why I said if you want to disengage from everything Harry Potter related, I completely understand. And that I wish you well in that. I really, really do. Because I do think a lot of people rejecting it is a healing move for them to take that step. For my part, and what you can expect here on the channel, I am going to be extremely transparent right now. I started this project because it was fun. I started reading Cassandra Clare's Draco trilogy because it was also something that was very near and dear to my nostalgia, and I'm having a fun time putting it together and presenting it for all of you. Now, in light of the things that JKR has done at the moment, I had to kind of ask myself in the last couple of days if I wanted to continue doing this in light of what she's done. And the answer is, I am going to continue this series, and as well as the little offshoots that she wrote that I have on hand, because this is a project that I started, and I have a really bad habit of picking up projects and then dropping them. And I don't want this to be another unfinished project that just kind of sits in my basket and doesn't get done. I don't want to do that. I actually want to finish what I started. So I will be doing that. I also wanted to make sure that all of the kind of artwork from Pottermore got its time to shine, and those are the pictures that you see in the background while I'm sort of talking, and they have, you know, the little animated stuff throughout. I really wanted those to also be things that got there a little time because the artwork is so lovely. And I will be featuring them out to completion as well. So you might see them in other projects. However, if you have decided, that you no longer want to engage with this series or anything else that I have up that is HP related, that is totally fine. I get that. I will also say that once this is completed, once I have run through all of the things that I have on hand, I will no longer be uploading anything Harry Potter fan fiction related. Once I have completed the mental process that I set up for myself almost over a year ago. So, I tried to keep that as short and sweet as I could. I apologize, it's probably a bit longer than intended. But I just wanted to be honest and open, especially for those of you that are listening to this series and are maybe wondering what I had to say on the subject. And that was all I wanted to say. So, without further ado, let us just get right into it. Chapter 15, Mattress of Wire. On the evening before Harry Potter's 17th birthday, not 2 weeks after his last glimpse of Salazar Slytherin, Draco left the manor and went and sat on the hill overlooking the house where they had buried what remained of his father. Nobody had tried to stop him from going. They were all being so careful around him these days, as if he were something terribly fragile that might break. It wasn't as if the others in the manor hadn't been through the same nightmare, but he had been its focal point. Harry's birthday was tomorrow. There would be a party, but he didn't want to go. There was still so much to be sorted through, to be understood, to be forgiven, and to try to forget. The night was beyond clear, as if someone had stretched a sheet of glass across the sky, through which the starlight shimmered with diamond brilliance. It had rained that day, and all around him the grass was wet, each blade glittering like a nail driven into the ground. Above him rose the mausoleum erected to the memory of his father. It was black onyx, and its flat surface seemed to draw in the darkness of the night. He wasn't sure what he hoped to accomplish by sitting here all night. Maybe he was saying goodbye, or maybe he hoped to commune with his father's ghost. But what would he even say to that ghost if it appeared? The memory of everything that had happened still burned against the backs of his eyes, and he found himself restless, looking for answers and finding none. Draco rose to his feet and looked down at the manor, gray in the dim light. The enormous terrace ran all around the tall, square stone house with its mansard roof, and at each corner were small, round towers with tall, narrow windows in them. Good for overturning hot oil onto advancing enemies. Shadows moved behind them now. He thought of the others who he had left sitting before the fire, calm in each other's company. The firelight on Ginny's hair, Hermione's laughter, Harry, quiet as always. Draco brushed the wet grass from the knees of his trousers and made his way over to the side of the mausoleum. Into the side, silvery letters had been cut. Lucius Malfoy, 1958 to 1997. Arte Pierre Sua. "Hello, Father," said Draco softly, placing a flat of a hand against the cold stone. "It's been a long time since we've talked." He stood for a moment, hearing the sound of his own voice, chill in the silence, feeling the beat of his heart. Then he turned until his back was to the marble wall, and stared out at the darkness which was punctuated by the coolly glowing lights of the manor in the distance. "I've thought about you a great deal lately, Father. Maybe not consciously, but you were always in the back of my mind. You might be surprised to hear that, but it's true. Slytherin wanted to be a sort of father to me, you know? Only he wasn't any better at it than you were. He just wanted the same thing you did, something to use, to advance his own power." As he spoke, his voice rose and sharpened, cutting the warm summer air, and inside his brain he heard Lucius's voice. "You are, after all, only what I made you to be." He sighed. "You tried to make me in the image of the Dark Lord, and what he wanted. Well, you couldn't do that, and I'm not weak. You told me I'd break like a clock wound backwards, but I didn't." He closed his eyes then against the flutter of images which whipped past like a deck of cards falling, saw himself standing in his father's cell at the asylum, backed against the wall, saw the top of Slytherin's tower scorched clean by flame, saw the black demons who rose out of hell to reclaim what was theirs. And then it came to him, what he had waited for, half expecting, half dreading. Grief. It rolled up and over him like a black wave, and he didn't even feel the wall of the mausoleum until he fell against it, and only half saw the shape of the great black dog as it crested the hill, looking at him with its great pale eyes like jewels in the darkness. Sirius watched as Draco fell against the wall of the crypt and hesitated. He recognized grief when he saw it, the stifled gasps that seemed to push the boy down the wall like the weight of an enormous fist, so that eventually he sat on the ground with his arms wrapped around himself, head buried in his hands. He himself had wept like that in Azkaban, only his had been dry sobs of sorrow and rage. It was enough. He straightened up out of his canine form and stepped forward, never having done anything quite like this before, not even for Harry, although he would have if he had been called upon. He went over to Draco, knelt down next to him, pried him firmly from the wall, and took him in his arms as if he had been a child of 6 and not a boy of 17. Draco didn't struggle, just grasped onto Sirius tightly, who was surprised to find that Draco wasn't crying. Something else was happening to him, something more complex and harrowing than tears. His body trembled, and Sirius remembered Narcissa having told him that her son didn't cry, but that was impossible. Everyone cried. He held onto Draco as the boy shook, until finally he pulled away from Sirius and sat back against the cold, dark marble of the mausoleum. His face was blank as he turned his head back towards it, but said nothing. And Sirius sat silently with him until the sun came up and its light broke over the manor, and it was Harry's birthday. "Where is Harry?" Sirius demanded, as the 6th owl of the day landed on the desk, depositing a heap of parcels labeled H. Potter on the polished rosewood surface. "This is getting ridiculous. Presents, fan mail." "He's upstairs with Draco," said Ginny, who was sitting on the window seat with Hermione, their discussion of what they would be wearing that evening momentarily interrupted. "The fencing." And she turned back to the shiny length of taffeta she had been fussing with and prodded it with her wand. It turned from blue-green to scarlet. "There, that looks better." Hermione made an approving noise. "Good color for you, Ginny." As if on cue, the door banged open and Draco came in, followed by Harry. Both boys were flushed with exertion, but both were grinning. Harry had his arms crossed over his chest and was arguing some finer point of fencing etiquette with Draco, whose silvery hair was mussed all around his head. He was telling Harry that he should consider himself blessed that he had finally mastered the knowledge of which end of the sword to poke into the opponent. "Git," said Harry amiably, determined to have the last word, and went to sit by Hermione, who hastily shrank the dress in her lap down to hand size with a reductus charm and shoved it behind her. She grinned up at Harry, who bent and kissed her upturned face. "Don't think I don't have a perfect retort for that, Potter," said Draco loftily, perching himself on the edge of the desk and poking curiously at the pile of parcels. "But I will let you off the hook on account of today being your birthday." Meanwhile, Ron, who had been lying on the floor reading the Prophet, rolled over onto his back and said, "Listen to this. Happy birthday, Harry. In the interest of the wizarding world, so long riveted on the mysterious disappearance of the boy who lived, we'll tonight center around a much happier event, his 17th birthday party, held this year at Malfoy Manor, the ancient familiar seat of the powerful Malfoy clan, now home as well to Sirius Black. Alright, this bit's a bit boring, so I'm skipping it. Enormous guest list, blah blah blah, hundreds of wizards and witches invited, blah, including Molly and Arthur Weasley, the headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore, miraculously recovered from his state of magically induced stasis. A miracle of wizarding medicine, says Dr. Simon Branford. It was not a miracle, snapped Hermione irritably. It was because Draco killed Slytherin, so all his spells ended. Branford's a bit of a prat, said Sirius absently, as he used his wand to flip open the various boxes littering the desk. But you invited him to the party anyway, pointed out Narcissa. Is there anyone you didn't invite, Sirius? Sirius shrugged. I wanted Harry to have a big celebration, he said, winking over at his godson, to make up for all those missed birthdays. I'd rather have big presents than a big party, said Harry, sliding down to sit on the floor next to Ron, with his back against Hermione's legs. Size doesn't matter, Harry, said Ginny with a grin. Ooh, a zinger from little Miss Weasley, said Draco, a smile curling his mouth. And here I was worried that you'd be depressed ever since we sent your boyfriend back to the Stone Age. He was not my boyfriend, and it was the Dark Ages. Honestly, you think you would know that with all the dark artifacts your father collected, said Ginny succinctly. She might have gone on, but something on the desk distracted her. What are those, Sirius? Sirius glanced over. Oh, the collective figure prototypes. The what? Demanded Ron. Harry looked sheepish, but Draco looked smug. Sirius shrugged. The same people who do the chocolate frog cards wanted to know if they could market collective figures of Harry and Draco as a promotional device. So they sent some prototypes for approval. And did you approve them? Demanded Ginny, fascinated. She got to her feet just as the Draco figure poked the Harry figure hard in the back, sending it tumbling off the edge of the desk. The Draco figure chortled to itself and did a malevolent dance. Ginny bent down, picked up the little Harry figure, who was wearing miniature Quidditch robes, and set it on its feet. Poor Harry, she said. No, we didn't approve them, said Sirius. Chocolate frog cards are enough. Draco and Harry don't need their faces plastered in all the wizarding shops from here to Ottery St. Catchpole, selling everything from tooth-flossing string mints to fancy broomsticks. Besides, I don't like mine, said Draco, looking critically down at his miniature, which looked like an exact copy of him, even down to the tiny smirk. It doesn't look like me, if you catch my meaning. Harry glanced over. You took the clothes off your figure, didn't you, Malfoy? Draco went slightly pink. Will you look at the time? He announced, and scooted sideways towards the door. I must go get dressed. Ginny and Hermione bubbled with laughter, and suddenly there was a loud pop, and Arthur Weasley's head and shoulders appeared in the fireplace. "Hello, Sirius," Arthur said genially, shedding soot. "You're early," said Sirius, glancing at the clock over the mantel. "'Lo, Dad," said Ron, waving but not getting up. "I'm not staying," said Arthur. "I just wanted to let you know that I've heard from Charlie down at the camp. He will be able to come after all. I know it's last minute." "Good," interrupted Sirius, looking genuinely pleased. "It's no problem, Arthur. I told you to bring the whole family." Hermione looked over at Draco, who had paused by the door. His face wasn't nearly as expressive as Harry's, but she could tell from the quick flash of his eyes that he too was pleased that Charlie would be there. As if he felt her gaze on him, his eyes slid over to her, and they locked for a moment. She read the message in them clearly and got to her feet. "I'd better go get dressed," she said, lightly touching Harry's shoulder. He looked up at her. "We've got hours yet?" Ron snorted. "You know how long it took her to get ready for the Yule Ball." "Good point," said Harry. "Maybe if you spent as much time on your hair, Harry," Hermione said, and avoided his playful swipe at her ankle with a little hop. She felt Draco's eyes on her as she left, and hoped Harry wouldn't notice, and that Draco would have enough sense to wait a decent interval of time before he followed her out of the room. She was just laying her dress out on the bed when she heard his knock. Hermione crossed the room and drew the door back, and for a moment, when she saw Draco standing there in the doorway with the torchlight behind him, turning his hair into a silvery halo, she felt a sour, sweet ache at the back of her throat and swallowed hard against it. He was wearing dark robes, and his hair was damp, as if he had come straight from a shower. The faint scent of soap and lemon zest clung to him like a cologne. He said nothing as he looked at her, merely held out a hand in which was clasped a dark brown parcel. Hermione smiled as she reached out and took it. "Is this the last of the ingredients?" she asked, peeling back the wrapping on the parcel and peering inside, where an assortment of rosemary, spiderwebs, and dried forget-me-nots were sealed in individual packets. Draco leaned against the architrave. He seemed disinclined to come into the room, and equally disinclined to leave. "Is that everything you need?" he asked casually. "Almost." "What else do you need?" "You," she said, without thinking. He raised his eyes up to hers, and she felt herself flush at the momentary wicked flash of almost laughter that brightened, then darkened his expression. It was easy sometimes to forget that spark of dangerous intrigue that threaded behind his every expression like a live current. He held his arms out, crossed at the wrists, and smiled blandly at her. "Whatever you need," he said. She didn't reach to take his hands. "Go sit on the bed," she said. He went obediently and sat, clashing horribly with the pink, flower-sprigged duvet cover. Hermione scooped the remainder of the pensieve ingredients up off her bureau and went to sit opposite him. She placed the shallow white bowl between them, dropped into it the ingredients Draco had brought her, mixed with a memory potion she had made the day before, and some yarrow root. The mixture smoked and steamed a little before settling into a greenish paste. She looked over at Draco, who looked mildly anxious, as if he were about to have his pulse taken. "Now it's up to you," she said. "Usually you'd need a wand at this point, but I suppose in your case you can go without. Just concentrate on the memories you want to preserve in the pensieve, then draw them out and put them in the bowl." "Thanks," he said, his silver eyes unreadable. She sensed that he wanted to be left alone for a moment, so she stood, retrieved her dress, stockings, and shoes from the bed, and went into the adjacent bathroom to change, closing the door firmly behind her. The dress robes she had chosen to wear that evening were modeled as closely as memory allowed on the dress Narcissa had given her to wear at the manor so many months ago. Still her favorite article of clothing she had ever owned, abated briefly. Only the color was different, a rich cinnamon brown instead of lilac. It had the same fitted bodice, which laced up the back, the same full skirt, and wide scooped neck showing rather more of her shoulders and the top of her chest than she was generally used to. With it went sheer silk stockings and a dramatic pair of high, strappy shoes. She glanced at herself in the tiny mirror over the sink, but it gave back only a tiny part of her reflection. So, gathering up her full skirts with one hand, she went back into the bedroom. Draco was still sitting on the bed, staring down into the pensieve, in which a whitish smoke was now swirling. When he saw her, his eyes widened, and she knew he admired the way she looked, and, more than that, remembered the original dress. Of course he would. Draco noticed things like that. "You're done?" she said, indicating the pensieve with a jerk of her chin. Draco nodded. It was easy." She went over to the large mirror that hung over the vanity table and looked at herself briefly. Then she picked up the necklace she'd been planning to wear that night, a topaz on the end of a silver chain, and reached to drape it around her throat. Feeling unaccountably nervous, she fumbled the clasp. Draco stood up, putting the pensieve down on the bed. "You want help with that?" She hesitated for a moment, then reached around and put the necklace into his hand. "If you don't mind." He looped the slender chain, bowing under the weight of the smoky topaz charm around her throat, and paused, his hands just brushing the curve where her neck met her shoulder. She felt the tiny hairs all up and down the sides of her arms prickle as he looked at her, his eyes gone dark and serious, and suddenly she saw herself as he saw her, the smooth curves of pale peach skin rising from the bodice of cinnamon silk, the very dark curls of hair so carefully arranged, looping like hyacinth tendrils around her face, her wide dark eyes, her full lower lip, trembling now with nervousness. The feel of his hands on her skin was familiar, and not at the same time. That part of Harry that he shared was almost palpable. If she closed her eyes, she had to remind herself whose hands were on her. Silver hair, not black. Gray eyes, not green. She heard the snap as he closed the clasp of the necklace and stepped back and away from her. "Done," he said lightly, although he was breaking quickly. "Draco, don't," he said, and then, "You look beautiful." She spoke then, without thinking. "Is there something between you and Ginny?" she heard herself ask. The words hung there between them, and for a moment he looked suddenly vulnerable. "For there to be something between me and Ginny," he said, as if weighing his words carefully, "there would have to be something of myself I could give her. And I don't think there's much of me left to give anyone right now." She bit her lip. "Don't wait to be happy, Draco," she said, her voice tight. "Is that what you want for me?" he said, and there was a little edge to his voice, the bright cutting side of a razor. "To be happy?" "More than anything," she said, and there was truth in that, and a little bit of a lie. He stood there for a moment, very still. Then he turned and lifted the finished pensieve off the bed. "Thanks for this," he said. "I couldn't have... not without you." "Draco," she burst out, without really knowing what she was saying. "If things were different..." "Stop," he said, and she did. He looked at her for a long time, standing so still that every previous stillness of his seemed an incomplete copy of this one. Finally, he spoke. She closed her eyes as he did, hearing only the cadences of his soft voice and the words it shaped. "For a long time," he said, "I waited to hear you say that if there was no Harry in your life, then you would be with me. I waited, but you never said it. And finally I realized that you never would. Not because you don't want me, but because you would never imagine a life for yourself without Harry in it." She looked at him, profoundly shaken. Her voice, when she spoke, was just above a whisper. "You can love more than one person at once, you know." He looked away from her. The torchlight painted his pale hair with gold. "I'll see you at the party," he said, and backed towards the door. She stared at him as he went out, and even after he let the door slam shut behind him, Hermione stood and looked after him for a long time. Sirius looked around himself in wonder. Narcissa had transformed the manor's grand ballroom, previously a vast, dank, and cavernous space, into a wonderland of light and color. Heavy velvet drapes hung floor to ceiling on the windows that ran the length of the western wall. Beyond them, the grounds could be seen, sloping down to a lake the color of dark malachite, and a distant border of trees, above which the sun was going down in a welter of blood and topaz, suffusing the ballroom with a rosy, ethereal light. On the terrace, Sibby Malone and the electric piccolo band's roadie elves were setting up the band's gear. Everywhere were strung ropes of glowing multicolored lights, their shapes changing as they twisted lazily in the air. A lamp would be a glowing bee at one moment, a radiant starburst the next. They cast deep patches of color against the pale marble floor, patterned with glowing golden stars in the shapes of familiar constellations. Narcissa had consulted a professional diviner who assured her that the configurations of the stars were the very luckiest, promising love and beneficence to the birthday boy. Long rosewood tables lined the walls, piled high with all manner of fanciful culinary concoctions, and a spectacular bar, which was lined with multicolored drinks that smoked and steamed, and were tended by Madame Rosmerta, who had jumped at the chance to come up from Hogsmeade for the occasion. "It's beautiful," said Sirius, turning to Narcissa, who smiled at him. She was looking unusually lovely in lilac silky robes, with a gorgeously beaded bodice. "And so are you." Narcissa beamed. Like her son, she smiled rarely, and like her son, the rarity of her smiles made their laser-bright radiance all the more spectacular. "You don't look too bad yourself." She fingered the lapel of Sirius's elegant dark suit. "Kenneth Troll?" "Hermione for wizards. Narcissa, I appreciate you doing all this for Harry, especially when Draco didn't even want a party for himself." Her smile turned a little sad. "I suppose this is still for him in a way, even if I won't admit it. Maybe that's wrong of me." "No, if it makes Harry happy, Draco will be pleased. Although he'd rather be tortured to death by pixies than admit it." "Ugh!" Narcissa swatted Sirius lightly on the arm. "Don't mention pixies. Bad luck," she said, then turned as Anton, the ghostly butler, floated through a nearby wall. He wore a translucent, flowered bow tie in honor of the occasion. "The first guest has arrived, madam," he announced. The first guest turned out to be Charlie Weasley, looking handsome and pleased to be out of his work clothes for a change. He wore elegant black dress robes against which his Weasley red hair stood out startlingly. "I'm early, I know," he said cheerfully, drawing a gold-colored bottle out of his pocket and handing it to Sirius. "Here, I brought something." "A bottle of wine?" said Narcissa, her eyebrows arched. Giant wine, said Sirius, squinting at the label. Good stuff, this. Half a glass will knock you out. A full glass, and you get your eyesight back in 3 months. Bit strong for young Harry, don't you think? Charlie shook his head. That's for you, Sirius. I've got something else for Harry, he said, turning suddenly grave. Sirius's curiosity was piqued. What did you get him? But Charlie refused to say a word on the subject, and Sirius soon ceased to press him on it as the guests started to arrive in earnest, and the anteroom began to fill up with friends, family, even Snape. Everyone there to celebrate Harry's 17th birthday. Oh, Draco, come on, said Ginny in a wheedling voice, then grinned sideways at Harry, who was sitting next to her on the bed in Draco's room. He, at least, was already dressed for the party, in black trousers, a dark green shirt, and, as usual, his hair tumbled untidily all over his head. She knew Hermione was still putting on the finishing touches in the other room. She was as careful and methodical about her appearance as she was about any potion. Draco, we won't laugh at you, we promise. I am not wearing this, and that is final, came Draco's voice from behind the floating silk screen that closed off his walk-in closet from the rest of the room. All they could see were his feet, clad in black boots. My mother must be mad, he said flatly. Runs the family, I'm told, said Harry pleasantly. Draco jerked the curtain back and glared at Harry. Potter! But his quip, whatever it might have been, was lost as Harry burst out laughing. Ginny herself had to clap her hand over her mouth to prevent herself from following suit. The outfit his mother had chosen for him was best left undescribed, although white and frilly and even shiny were certainly words that passed through Ginny's mind as she looked at him. Also, was that a peasant collar? Surely it couldn't be. And were those rhinestones? Draco flushed, then glared. It's a nightmare, he said, looking horribly pained. Harry wheezed with laughter. You look like an albino penguin. That is enough out of your smart mouth, Potter, said Draco, and stepped back behind the curtain. There was a brief flash of colorful sparks, and for a moment Ginny worried that the screen might catch fire, which nearly made her succumb to another round of giggles. When Draco stepped out again, Ginny lost all her urge to laugh. He wore charcoal gray trousers that looked as if they had been designed especially for him, and a soft white shirt that brought out the blue undercurrents in his eyes. His shoes were dark brown leather, the kind that looked as if they probably cost 100 galleons of shoelace. He looked a little older, a great deal more elegant, and very, very rich. It was a bit intimidating. He looked at Ginny and smiled. Is this better? Ginny nodded, lost for words. Somewhat less revolting, said Harry. Suddenly, the door opened, and Hermione was standing there, radiantly pretty in dark brown satin, her hair pulled back neatly, and her face framed by a cascade of curls. Her dark eyes went immediately to Harry, who sat up on the bed and looked at her, stunned. You look beautiful, he said. Hermione said nothing, just turned pink. Harry got up off the bed and went over to her and kissed her very gently on the cheek, brushing back a stray tendril of hair as he did so. Ginny glanced at Draco, who was looking bored with his hands in his pockets. May I point out that this is my bedroom? He said, eyeing Harry and Hermione goggle-eye display of affection icily. If there are going to be snogs going on, either I should be involved in them, or they should go on elsewhere. And since I'm none too interested in a threesome... Hermione turned pinker. I just came to say that people are starting to arrive, she said primly. Ginny, all your brothers are here. Bill and Charlie, too, Ginny interrupted eagerly. Yes, and you'll never guess who Bill brought as his date. Fleur. "She does get around," said Harry, sounding impressed. "About 360 degrees, said Draco. "Didn't she date Bill before?" "She did," confirmed Hermione with a nod. "Percy and the twins are here with their girlfriends too. Charlie came on his own, though." "That won't last," said Ginny with a grin. "Charlie's a girl magnet when he wants to be." "Must be the leather trousers," said Harry, affecting a bland expression. "Everybody out!" snapped Draco, whose patience for jokes about leather trousers had worn very thin. "I have to finish getting dressed. Bugger off, the lot of you!" Harry and Hermione vanished with a wave, and Ginny went to follow them, but a light touch on her arm made her pause. She turned and saw Draco looking down at her, a bright, mischievous sparkle lighting his eyes. "Wait a second, Weasley," he said. "I want a word with you." She felt her heart turn over in her chest and mentally frowned at herself. It was just Draco. There was no point getting all worked up just because he touched her arm. As she stepped back into the room, Draco turned to grab something off her dresser and handed it to her. It was a small, red-bound book entitled A Genealogy and History of the Hogwarts Founders by Fabiana Patters Brown. She blinked. "What is this?" He smiled again, a bit wolfishly, she thought. "A very interesting book that I stumbled upon while in my father's library," he said. "I especially love the parts where Benjamin Gryffindor, really a crashing bore he was, and I kept coming across mentions of a certain mysterious red-headed girl who appeared and disappeared in his camp. That wouldn't have been you, by any chance, on your oh-so-secret time travel mission?" Ginny snorted inelegantly. "What are you getting at, Malfoy?" "Well," said Draco, sitting down on the edge of his bed, "it's occurred to me that there's a bit of a mystery about this Ben Gryffindor chap. He's got an heir, right? But no wife, and no attachments reported. But then there's this red-headed vixen who popped in and abruptly out of young Benjamin's tent like she lives there. How long were you there, really?" "Are you asking me if I'm Harry's great-great-grandmother?" Ginny demanded. Draco had the grace to look slightly abashed. Ginny took a few seconds to savor the moment. It was not often that she was able to render Draco Malfoy speechless. Finally, she laughed. "All right, fine," she admitted. "I'm not Harry's great anything. I never met Ben's son, or whatever woman was his son's mother. And as a matter of fact," at which point she leaned in quite close and whispered something very softly into Draco's right ear, something that made his eyebrows fly up like wings and his mouth quirk into a sly grin. "You're kidding," he said. She shook her head. "I'm not." "Well, well," he intoned, bouncing up on his feet, the grin never leaving his lips. "The things you don't learn in Professor Binns's class." His eyebrows drew together. "However, there was something else I was wondering." "What?" "Well, I thought you got your bright idea about going back into the past because of the Gryffindor army that disappeared. But when Ben went back home, he took his army with him. Where did they all go?" Ginny shook her head. "That's a long story, and I have to run. At this rate, I'll be half-dressed when the party starts." Draco leaned back on his elbows. "I really see no problem with that." Ginny cut her eyes sideways at him and turned to go, but he held her back. "Shall I walk you down the stairs?" he asked. "What?" "It's tradition," he said. "Guests enter the ballroom in pairs and are announced at the foot of the stairs. It's always been done that way. Harry will go down with Hermione, Sirius with my mother, Bill with Fleur, and so on." She looked at him steadily, long past the point where any ordinary teenage boy would have started shifting from foot to foot. Draco just looked back at her, impassive, a small smile teasing the corner of his mouth. the grey eyes unreadable as always. "It's tradition," Draco said again. "You said that already." "Well, the essence of tradition is repetition." "All right." "What?" "All right. I'll meet you at the top of the stairs and—" "Why don't you just change in here?" he said suddenly. "It should only take you 15 minutes. Stunned by his suggestion that she stay and change in his room, Ginny's mind had suddenly drawn a blank, and she felt stupid when she opened her mouth and said, "I can't get beautiful in 15 minutes." "You're already beautiful," he said calmly, leaning back against the headboard of his bed and flipping open the book. She looked at him quickly, hard, to see if he was lying. But of course, Draco didn't lie. What were the other things he said he didn't do? "I don't lie or faint, and I don't dance." "All right, I'll change in here," she said, "if you promise to dance." Draco looked up. "With you or just in general?" "It would look a bit funny if you just danced with yourself." "All right," said Draco offhandedly, returning his attention to the book. "I promise. I'll dance." Grabbing up her dress from the bed where she had left it, Ginny ducked behind the silk screen and, with fumbling fingers, began to undo the fastening on her trousers. To distract herself, she began to fold each bit of clothing she took off and set them neatly on the ground at her feet. The dress she had chosen was perfect, blood-colored satin, with rows of black bows down the front and straps that crossed in back, showing her slim, freckled shoulders to great advantage. Grabbing up her wand from her pocket of her trousers, she glanced in the floor-length mirror on the other side of Draco's wardrobe door and began to meticulously charm her unruly locks into a velvety river of flame-colored silk, after which she fastened it up with clips in the shape of tiny, multicolored butterflies. Flustered, she pulled back the screen, and Draco looked up from his book expectantly. "Are you ready?" he asked, and held out a hand to her. Ginny ignored his proffered hand and pointed a bare toe at him accusingly. "I forgot my shoes. I think I must have left them in the library, and all I have are my worn trainers, which always goes with formal attire, I'm sure," she scowled. Draco grinned. It lit up his face. "Accio," he murmured under his breath. Something flew out of his wardrobe, and he caught it in the air, then tossed it to her. Reflexively, she seized it and stared. "Ducky socks?" she said, looking down at them. "They're clean," said Draco. "They're socks," said Ginny, "with ducks." "Put them on," said Draco, and so calmly did he say it that Ginny found herself sitting down on the bed and drawing the socks onto her feet. No sooner were they on than he waved a hand at them. There was a bright, sharp flash of light, and where the ducky socks had been, a pair of transparent, crystal shoes sparkled on her feet. Ginny looked from the delicate and prism-like shoes to Draco, and then back at her feet, and then back at Draco. His expression was unreadable. In that moment, his whole personality was as unintelligible as a book written in parcel tongue. Here was a boy whose clever tongue could flatter a friend or cut apart an enemy with equal deftness, who loved as fiercely as he hated. A bundle of contradictions was Draco Malfoy, but then so were most people, weren't they? "Glass slippers," she said finally. "Cute, if not original." "I thought it was better to go with the old standards," said Draco. "But they're rarely ducky socks," said Ginny. "Nobody needs to know that but you and me," he said, and held out his hand to her again, and this time she took it.
Harry Potter and Hermione Granger, Rubius Hagrid and Madame Olympe Maxime, Arthur and Molly Weasley, Bill Weasley and Fleur Delacroix, Remus Lupin and Heidi Howard, Angelina Johnson and Fred Weasley, George Weasley and... Is that young Mr. Weasley? Miss... Anton, the ghostly butler, who had been having a delightful time bellowing out the name of each couple as they descended the floating marble staircase into the ballroom, stammered for a moment and paused. Not surprisingly, since George had taken advantage of his moment of limelight to show off the newest product of Weasley's Wizard Wheezies, penguin peppermints. Jana, his pretty and long-suffering girlfriend, held her satin wrap well away from the beady-eyed Pennyped, squatting next to her on the stairs.
"Oh my, George," she wailed in a despairing tone. "Why?" With a pop, the penguin turned back into George, looking immaculate in a black velvet suit.
"I'm sorry, love," he said repentantly. "It seemed like a good idea at the time."
"Humph," said Jenna, and flounced down the steps, trailing her celadon green dress robes. George hurried after her. At the top of the stairs, Honoria, Percy's fiancée, turned to him with a severe expression on her delicate features. "Honestly, Percy, I cannot bear that brother of yours."
"Yes," Percy agreed, resplendent in pinstripe trousers and suspenders, and looked as if he were attempting not to laugh. "Very trying, the twins are."
"You would never turn into a penguin at a public dinner party, would you?"
Whatever Percy might have wanted to say in response was drowned out by Anton's bellow. "Percival Weasley and Honoria Glossop." They descended and joined Harry, Hermione, and the rest of the Weasley offspring at the bottom of the stairs. Bill and Fleur were holding hands. Angelina, stunning in a silver-sheathed dress, was watching as Fred gave Harry his birthday present. Harry opened the box and looked at the contents dubiously. "More glasses?" he said, lifting a pair of spectacles out of the box. "Is this your way of telling me my specs are unflattering? Because I already knew that." "These aren't just any specs, Harry," said Fred, grabbing up the pair of glasses and waving them in front of the other boy's face. "These are Weasley X-ray specs. You can use them to see through anything." "Like Mad-Eye Moody's eye?" asked Ron, looking fascinated. "Right," said George, and put them on. "For instance, at this very moment, I can see that Honoria's wearing leopard print knickers." Honoria looked appalled. "I am not!" "Oh, yes, you are," said George. "Now then," said Percy ineffectually. "I am not!" Honoria repeated, turning sideways and appealing to Fleur. Fleur shrugged. "There is nothing wrong with leopard print lingerie," she said breezily. "I am wearing some myself." Honoria made a derisive sound and flounced away, followed by Percy. Harry looked suspiciously at George. "Do those things really work?" George grinned. "I think they work extremely well," he said. Hermione giggled, and suddenly Fleur made a squealing noise, and it took everyone a moment to realize that she was squealing not at the twins' witticisms, but at a girl who had just joined their party. She was a small, dark-haired girl in long white robes, embroidered all over with tiny bluebirds and starlings. "Monique!" Fleur exclaimed, seizing the girl, and kissed her on both cheeks. Then she turned to the rest of the group with a smile. "This is my cousin Monique. Monique, you know Bill, and this is Harry Potter, of course, and Ron Weasley, and... Did you really defeat a Dementor all by yourself?" Monique said, so suddenly that everyone jumped and looked at Harry. Harry began, then paused, because she wasn't looking at him, but at Ron, and rather expectantly at that. Ron looked utterly alarmed. "What?" Monique reached out and took his hand. "Fleur told me all about how brave you were," she said. "Well, said Ron, who was pink around the ears. I mean, I didn't. Harry stepped firmly on his foot. There were 3 Dementors, actually, Ron finished weakly. Monique's huge blue eyes widened. Dance with me, she breathed, and whisked Ron away with such rapidity and force that one was left to wonder if she had used an Accio spell without anyone noticing. Hermione stared after them, looking shocked. Well, really, she said, sounding just a shade indignant, as Monique cozied up to Ron on the dance floor. I can't believe he'd fall for her act. Which act? Grinned Angelina. The showing up wearing a low-cut dress and behaving as if he's the most wonderful thing in the world act? Because you'd be shocked how many guys would fall for that. I resent that broad generalization, said Fred, then paused and whistled. He was looking up at the top of the stairs, and the rest of them followed his gaze, just as Anton bellowed out, Charlie Weasley and Reeson Malfoy. Hermione blinked in surprise. Charlie Weasley, broad-shouldered and handsome in a neatly cut dinner jacket, was coming down the stairs with an unfamiliar young woman on his arm, a black-haired beauty in a silver dress, who hugged his side so tightly that he almost seemed to be wearing her like a bracelet. No sooner had they reached the foot of the stairs than the girl planted a kiss on Charlie's cheek and disappeared into the crowd. Who was that? George demanded as Charlie ambled over to them, eyebrows raised. She was really... Jenna elbowed him in the ribs. Not somebody I've ever seen before, George finished somewhat lamely. Nor I, said Charlie with a shrug. She grabbed me at the top of the stairs and begged me to walk her down. Anyway, I was afraid if I didn't, I'd end up walking down with Snape. He was standing just behind us and didn't have a partner. She probably didn't have an invitation, said Hermione, looking after the girl, but unable to locate her in the crowd. She said she was a Malfoy, said Charlie. She certainly looks like a Malfoy. Doesn't mean she's invited, said Hermione, who knew how convoluted and expansive the Malfoy family connections were. It's done now, said Charlie, in a tone that indicated that this line of conversation held little interest for him. He turned away from Hermione, towards Harry, and said something quietly to him. Harry nodded, looking surprised, then leaned over to Hermione and kissed her a bit clumsily on the ear. I've got to go talk to Charlie, he said. I'll be right back. Hermione nodded and glanced after him as he followed Charlie a little ways away. With a jolt that shocked her right down to her core, she noticed that Harry and Charlie's heads were now on the same level. When had that happened? A faint, cold feeling began in her stomach. Some part of her wanted to think of herself and Harry as children, wanted to keep him as a child, as if that would keep him safe. Safe from the forces that had taken his parents' lives. Her eyes slid past Harry to Ron, entwined on the dance floor with Fleur's cousin, then hastily back at the twins, both of whom were staring back at the grand staircase with peculiar expressions. And they weren't the only ones. Angelina and Jana were too. Hermione followed their gazes just as Anton bellowed out, Draco Malfoy and Virginia Weasley. A peculiar feeling began in Hermione's stomach as she watched Draco and Ginny descending the stairs. She couldn't help but notice that they were holding hands. They both looked gorgeous, beautifully dressed, and as if they had been born to walk down elegant marble staircases and gigantic ancestral homes in front of crowds of admiring people. Which in Draco's case was true. But Ginny, well, her wizarding family was old. Chin looks all right, doesn't she? Said George, with older brother pride in his voice. She looks great, aside from that big ugly thing stuck to her arm, said Fred cheerfully. Percy blinked. Ah, you mean Malfoy? He smiled and pushed his spectacles up the bridge of his nose. He's getting nearly as famous as Harry these days, isn't he? Teen Witch Weekly was running some sort of contest the other day. First prize was a photo of Draco. Now be nice, said Honoria, and extended her hand as Draco and Ginny reached the bottom of the stairs and joined their group. Ginny, lovely to see you. Draco Malfoy,
You probably don't remember me, but
Honoria Glossop, said Draco, looking at her thoughtfully. Ravenclaw, you were a 7th year when I was in 3rd. Your family are the Dorchester Glossops, aren't they? Totley Towers. Honoria nodded, quite pink with pleasure.
You have a remarkable memory.
The rest of the group proved less easy to charm. Angelina, recollecting Draco from many a bitter Quidditch match, looked at him as if he were something stuck to a fly swatter. Jana looked nervous, and Fred and George looked churlish. Hermione felt herself unable to say anything, as feelings of confusion prevented her from speaking. She wished Harry were there, but he had vanished to speak with Charlie. Meanwhile, the young men in question were just settling in to talk.
I'm glad you decided to come to the party, Charlie, Harry was saying as he held out a hand for Charlie to shake, and the other took it. It was a very adult gesture on Harry's part, and Charlie felt something smart at the back of his eyes as he looked at the boy in front of him. He remembered the first time he had seen Harry at the Quidditch World Cup. Small, pale, and almost lost in the clothes that were 2 sizes too big for him. He could almost forgive him for the way Professor McGonagall had famously evaluated Harry's capabilities upon first seeing him fly. Charlie gave Harry's hand a firm shake, then released it. "Happy birthday, Harry," he said. Harry smiled, looking collected and relaxed. "Thanks," he said. "To tell you the truth, I almost didn't come," Charlie said, then reached into his pocket. "But I wanted to give you your birthday gift." Harry looked surprised. "You didn't have to, Charlie. I mean, after everything you've done for us. I don't know how much dragon keeping pays, but hang on there, Harry. I didn't exactly spend much money on it. In fact, I didn't spend any money on it. It's a bit of an odd story, but..." Charlie took a deep breath, not taking his hand out of his pocket. "You know how close the dragon camp is, or was, to Slytherin's castle?" he asked. "Anyway, I know you were there the night that the castle vanished. Disappeared without a trace, didn't it?" Harry nodded. "Nothing left. Just a sort of round, flat, grassy area and a few stones." "Yes," said Charlie. "Well, about a week after what happened to you all, I saw some odd lights in the sky over the forest, so I took a dragon out and went to investigate." "You rode a dragon to the place where the castle was?" Charlie nodded. "And was there something there?" "There wasn't something there," said Charlie edgily, "but there was someone there." Harry's eyebrows rocketed up, and his question came out on an explosion of breath. "Who?" "I don't know," said Charlie, a bit miserably. "A man, I think. Tall, wearing a long hooded robe and gloves. He might have had an obscurus charm over his face, because I couldn't make out his features. He'd been sending up green flares with his wand into the sky, but when I arrived, he stopped and greeted me civilly, called me Dragon Rider. Then he asked me if I thought I was a brave man." "And you said?" "I said I tried to be one. So he reached into his robes and he brought out this." Charlie drew his hand out of his pocket at last, and with it, the object he had been holding. He handed it to me and said, "Dragon Rider, take this to the heir of Gryffindor, the one who lived. It will keep him safe when all else fails, when charms and spells prove useless, and his Majid powers have forsaken him. Give it to him if you value his life." "Bloody hell," said Harry, and stared at the thing in Charlie's hand. It was a rough sort of circle, made of a material that glowed like ruby syrup shot through with charcoal. It looked like glass, but when Harry took it in his hand, he found it was much heavier and denser than glass, and more flexible, like a thin steel cable. It looked well used. There were scratches all around the rim. "What the hell is this?" "No idea," said Charlie. "Then I had a time, I can tell you, trying to decide whether to give it to you or not. I thought it might be something dangerous, something from you-know-who. I mean, bloody hooded men popping up in the dead of night, handing things over, then vanishing again. It doesn't inspire trust. But what he said, I was afraid to take the chance of not giving it to you. He shrugged, so I decided to make it your choice. You're old enough, Harry. Harry looked up at him, his green eyes steady. Thanks, Charlie. It's not much of a present, said Charlie with a regretful smile. No, said Harry, closing his hand around the scarlet circle. I meant, thanks for trusting me and treating me like an adult. Oh, said Charlie, a cold misgiving coalescing in his stomach. Of course, Harry, of course. Hermione watched as both Harry and Charlie concluded their talk and began to make their way back to the group. When they did, they were accompanied now by two other guests, Victor Crumb and a tall, dark-haired man with bright blue eyes, who Charlie introduced as Aidan Lynch. You used to be Seeker for Ireland, said Angelina, recognizing him immediately. Still am, said Lynch in a pleasantly accented voice. Took a year off, but I'm back now. I saw you've got a Quidditch pitch outside, said Aidan to Draco. We should have a game tomorrow. Victor and I. We're staying in town and... You mean you and Victor against me and Potter? The four of us, said Draco. An all-Seekers game? Oh, that'll be a blast. Just hanging about for eternity, waiting for the snitch to show up. Hermione glanced sideways at him. She could tell that the toll of spending this much time in the company of Weasleys who disliked him was beginning to show. When Draco was under stress, he was sarcastic. Harry, on the other hand, was pleased. I think it sounds relaxing, he said with a slow half-smile. An all-Seekers game, I mean. Draco said nothing. Hermione bit her lip. She looked over at Harry, who smiled at her and took her hand. Let's dance, he said, his green eyes shining brightly. But you hate dancing, Harry. True, but I want to see what happens. Don't you? Hermione let herself grin. You know I do, she said, and threw her arms around his neck as they waltzed out onto the floor. As he had promised Ginny he would dance, Draco decided that he would not be outdone by Harry, who was moving rather jerkily with Hermione in his arms across the dance floor. He turned to Ginny and held out a hand. Would you like to dance? Ginny turned to him. I'd love to, she said. Draco took her hand and whirled her away into the mass of dancers. They nearly bumped into Ron and Fleur's cousin, who were snogging in a manner that Ginny felt should not be legal in England. Draco, as it turned out, was an excellent dancer, holding her lightly around the waist, feeling the warmth of him against her chest. He looked down into her face, which was flushed, her eyes alight. Her hair, the color of firelight seen through a glass of red wine, spilled down over her shoulders, threaded through with strands of reflected gold. She had never looked prettier. After a long pause, she smiled at him. I'm afraid I'm not as good at this as you are. I don't see why it bothers you so much, he replied. You dance well, really well. Ginny looked surprised. I suppose it's better than Harry. He keeps landing on Hermione's feet. Hermione would not mind if Harry stood on her feet all evening, said Draco. And would you mind, she said against his ear, if I stood on your feet all evening? I'm afraid not, he said. And why is that? It's the red hair, said Draco. I seem to be defenseless against it. I think Ron's available for dancing, Ginny said, if red hair is what you're after. I'm afraid Ron seems to fancy that French tart, replied Draco equably. You'll have to do. Ginny pulled back a little, looking up into his face with his eyes wide and luminous with mischief. They had stopped dancing now, and he felt that heat, that thickening in his blood that always seemed to happen when she looked at him like this. Without even thinking about it, Draco bent to kiss her, but his lips only just brushed hers, sending a shower of sparks through her nerves, when a hand reached out and tapped Draco firmly on the shoulder. Pulling back, he straightened up and whirled around, ready to snap at the interloper, whoever he might be, but it was a she. A slender young woman with long black hair that spilled over her bare shoulders, and an extremely low-cut bodice of her silver gown, which was gathered in her narrow waist, with a thick gold chain that rode low over her hips, each link of which was a tiny golden poppy holding a ruby in its center. "Hello, Draco," she said. "Do you remember me?" Draco goggled at her, feeling that he should snap at her for being so rude, but something about her demeanor held him back. She looked oddly familiar, and yet he couldn't place her at all. "Who are you?" he demanded, knowing he sounded impolite, but then it had been rather impolite of this witch to interrupt an obviously private moment. "I'm Rhys Malfoy," she said, a smile teasing the corner of her red-painted mouth. "Your cousin." Draco narrowed his eyes and glanced at the gold and ruby poppies. "You're from the Singapore branch of the family, aren't you?" he said. "I recognize that symbol you're wearing. You're part of the family that made a killing by exporting illegal dragon's blood in the 1800s. "So you do remember me," she breathed. "Would you like to dance?" Draco felt Ginny tense in his arms. "I'm already committed to this dance," he said, "as should be obvious." Rhys's smile widened. "Oh no," she said, and held out a slender hand. "I don't think you are." For a moment he simply looked at her in surprise, then his gaze moved to her outstretched hand, and he stiffened. On the fourth finger of her right hand she wore a signet ring in the shape of a griffin, on which an M was engraved, wound round with tiny serpents. The griffin's wings made a band of the ring, which was carved entirely out of a single piece of onyx. He knew the ring. It had been his father's. He had been wearing it the day he died. The breath went out of Draco in a whooshing gasp. He was unconscious of his hand going slack in Ginny's, or her startled eyes on his face. "Dance with me," said Rhys, and her eyes held a warning. For a long moment he hesitated. Then, recollecting himself, he turned back to Ginny. Without letting him finish, Ginny stepped back, letting her hands fall out of his. "It's all right," she said tightly. "I'm sure Aiden wouldn't mind asking me to dance." And she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Draco looked after her, feeling disappointed. Why were the cards always stacked against them as soon as things began to get interesting? Feeling numb, he took Rhys's hand. Her slender fingers closed tightly around his, and he could feel the imprint of her sharp nails on his skin. He let her lead him out onto the dance floor, where she immediately threw her arms around him and yanked him against her, pressing their bodies so tightly together he would have been astonished if a sliver of light had been able to penetrate the nearly non-existent distance between them. She was wearing a very sweet, very heavy perfume that made him think of jasmine and sandalwood, that created a slight dizziness behind his eyes. He tried to focus on her face, which was a bit difficult given his lightheadedness. With her black hair and red lips, she looked a little like a banshee, but her gray eyes were pure Malfoy. She tilted her head back and let her red lips brush his ear. "Draco," she whispered, "are you ready to hear what I have to tell you?" He tried to pull back, but she clung on like a limpet. "That depends on what it is." She pouted a little. "You're no fun," she complained. "Where's the famous Draco Malfoy charm I've heard so much about?" "I've generally found it necessary to tone it down at crowded events," said Draco dryly. "It can be dangerous." "To women especially, I imagine." "Yes. Occasionally they injure themselves in their frenzy to disrobe." "Like that little redhead you were kissing?" Draco stopped dead in the middle of a dance step and tightened his grip on her hands. She winced but kept smiling. I think it's time you told me what you came here to tell me, he said tightly. You talk, or I leave. She tossed her hair back. It's a message, she said. You might not like it. It is a message you need to receive. Draco began to pull away politely. I don't think so. The message, she purred, is hidden inside my bodice, if you'd care to try and find it. Draco looked at her sideways. Her bodice was so tight, he couldn't imagine how she could fit so much as a tissue in there, much less a substantial piece of parchment. I do not grope strange women on public dance floors, he said, especially if they are related to me. She smiled coolly and reached for his hand. A moment later, he felt something cold, hard, and round pressed into his palm. She closed his fingers around it. He knew without looking that it was the signet ring. Your father wanted you to have this, she said. What was your name? Rhysson? What are you playing at? He was astonished at the coldness in his own tone. I can't tell you, she said. I must give you the written message. Those were my instructions. Instructions from who? In answer, she only smiled and tugged at his closed fist. He let her lead him into the shadow of a curtained alcove. She pushed him into it and then followed, dragging the curtain shut behind them. In the shadowy half-light, she smirked up at him, let go of his hands, and reached down into her bodice. Draco took an involuntary step back. Although he didn't take his eyes off her, wouldn't it have been easier on you to just jump out of a birthday cake stark naked, if this was what you were after? So naff, replied Rhysson, amused. I'd like to do things my way. Anyway, I'm just the delivery service. Something gives me the feeling you don't work for the Ministry official owl post, Draco said, his voice sharp like razor wire. Or is this something only the premium customers get? A few moments later, the tapestry was drawn aside, and a pleased-looking Rhysson Malfoy exited the alcove, followed by Draco, who was clutching a roll of parchment in his left hand. It was a letter, and it was addressed to him. With a wink, she vanished into the crowd. Draco stared after her for a moment, then turned and walked quickly towards the wide marble staircase at the far end of the hall. He took the stairs 2 at a time, strode down the long second-floor hallway to the library, and bolted himself in. The fire was burning in the grate, sparkling bright blue and purple in honor of the party. There was no other light in the room, except the cold moonlight that came through the high arched windows, throwing milky patches against the floor. The cherry wood desk that had been his father's, piled high now with gift-wrapped presents for Harry, loomed ghost-like in the center. With a slight shiver of unpleasant premonition, Draco crossed the room to the fireplace, unrolled the parchment he was holding, and began to read. Draco, that was a very amusing show you put on last night, ranting and raving at my graveside. Most of what you said was ridiculous adolescent posturing. I have no plans to give over my only son to the rabble, the Potters and the Blacks and the Weasleys, and the rest of the trash of this world. You belong to me, Draco. You always have. And to the dark power under whose auspices we both are bound. You know of whom I speak. He sends his thanks to you for ridding the world of the only wizard who could have stood against him and his rise. I myself confess I had my doubts that you were capable, but his faith in you never faltered. Whatever powers he gifted you with in your childhood when he passed on his heir of Slytherin status to you, they are beyond anything I might have imagined. Your rebellious nature troubles me, but he assures me that can be curbed given the right incentives. In any case, for the first time, you have made me proud. I enclose our family signet ring as a token that I consider you, at last, a real Malfoy. Wear it, and wait for word from me. I shall come to you on your true birthday. Expect me. Know that I am watching you, and that I am, as always, your father, Lucius Nero Malfoy. As soon as his eyes had scanned his father's scrawling signature, the paper burst into ashes in Draco's shaking hands, sifting away through his fingers, leaving behind only what he had been clutching in his fist, the signet ring, which caught the light of the fire and gleamed in the darkness like a live black coal. My father, he thought. My father is alive. Harry stood in the shadows beside a tapestry and looked down at his wrist. When he had gently extracted himself from Hermione to take a breath, he had been swept up by Lavender, and then Parvati, who had begged him to dance. He was glad to see them all, but generally felt secure when dancing only with Hermione, who knew what a dreadful dancer he was and did not mind. He was troubled. The band Charlie had given him, which rested awkwardly around his wrist, had changed temperature, becoming blazingly hot one moment, scalding cold the next. As he moved between the close-packed dancers on the floor, he looked down at it, where it had chafed his wrist red and raw, and wondered what the hell it meant. "That's an expensive-looking piece of jewelry," said a soft voice in Harry's ear. He turned to see the girl who had come down the stairs with Charlie earlier, standing at his shoulder, smiling at him. Up close, she was clearly a Malfoy, with the bones of cheek and chin and jaw, and steady gray eyes. Those eyes were fixed firmly on the band around his wrist. "Some thief will have your hand to get that from you," she said. Harry narrowed his eyes at her. Something about her set his teeth on edge. She was not natural. "I don't see where it's any of your business." "It's not jewelry, you know," she said breezily, and smiled. "It's a runic band. But perhaps you would be better off to treat it like jewelry, and to let a thief steal it." Harry felt a prickle of cold run along his spine, and shook his head to clear it. "What makes you say that?" "Well, for one thing, I can read runic lettering," she said, looking down at the band. Harry followed her gaze to his wrist, seeing again the marks along the band that had looked like scratches to him. "Can you?" Harry shook his head slowly. A cold feeling of mistrust was spreading up his spine, spearing the base of his skull. "No, but my girlfriend can." "Can she?" The girl put a long, cool hand against his cheek and turned his face toward her. There was no desire in her touch, no lust. Rather, Harry felt as if with her gaze she was somehow turning him inside out, examining the contents of his brain. "Then she can tell you that the rune augurs betrayal," she said. "Those you think you can trust, you cannot. Those to whom you will go to seek advice will offer you false counsel. Your enemies will find you out, and your friends will arrive too late to give you aid." "Is that your prediction?" Harry asked, trying to keep his voice light, although his heart was pounding. "It's a certainty," said the girl, her eyes unreadable. "And is there anything I can do to avoid this outcome?" "Probably not." She pointed a long finger at the band around his wrist. "But if I were you, I would thread that like an extra buckle on my belt, not wear it so obviously on my wrist, inviting trouble. If you are determined to keep it, that is." "I'm determined," said Harry. "Yes," said the girl. "Yes, you are, aren't you?" Later, Hermione found Harry standing alone against the wall of the ballroom. Despite the fact that it was his birthday and his party, he was standing far apart from the rest of the crowd, looking so serious that she felt it might take a fishing line to retrieve him. She put a hand on his shoulder, and he jumped. "Did I startle you?"
"Yes, just a little."
"What were you thinking about?" His eyes seemed to slide into focus as they studied her face, the green deepening to nearly black.
"Nothing."
She bit her lip. "Do you want to go somewhere? Talk, maybe?"
"Yes," Harry said, and Hermione jumped at the chance to be alone with him. "We could walk on the balcony." They left without anyone noticing, through the French doors that were partly concealed by a pillar wreathed in fairy lights.
Outside, the cool air struck Hermione's face and bare shoulders, making her shiver, although the night was fairly warm. Moonlight spilled over the pale stones of the balcony, lighting the garden and the empty gazebo wreathed in white lanterns, striking cool sparks from the rims of Harry's glasses. Hermione took his hand. "Over here." She led him into the shadow of an archway, against the high wall of the manor, and he looked at her inquiringly. "I wanted to give you your birthday present," she said.
"I thought we weren't meant to be doing presents until midnight," replied Harry, mildly curious.
"I wanted to give you this present in private."
Harry's eyebrows went up. "Does it involve exotic dancing and chocolate syrup?"
"No," said Hermione firmly. "For that you'll have to wait until Christmas."
Harry grinned. Taking a deep breath, Hermione retrieved the small box she had so carefully wrapped from a pocket of her dress and handed it to Harry. She watched as he took it from her and tore away the wrappings, his quick and clever hands flicking the catch aside and snapping the box open as deftly as he often caught the snitch. She held her breath, watching him, his dark green eyes widening behind his glasses, the uncertain look on his face as he raised those same eyes to her, and her heart skipped a beat, as it always did when he looked at her so directly. "This looks expensive, Hermione," he said, looking down at the box and then back up at her.
It wasn't expensive," she said, raising her chin. "Sirius gave it to me to give to you."
Dumbstruck, Harry reached down and took out a pocket watch by its silvery safety chain and lifted it out of the box. Moonlight struck a point of cold fire along the rim of its face. "I've needed a watch since 4th year, but I couldn't—"
"Turn it over, Harry," she said, and he did. His eyes widened as he looked at the inscription carved there. "Sirius said it was your father's," she said, her words spilling over each other in her haste and nervousness. "He said your mother gave it to him when they turned 17, and it never left his side until the night until Sirius found them, and he took it off your father, but it was broken. He tried to get it to work right again, took it all over Diagon Alley, but no one could fix it, so he wasn't sure what to do with it. He gave it to me to see if there was anything I could think of. I took it to London, to a Muggle watch repair shop, and they fixed it straight away, and I had them put that inscription in under the original one. I hope you don't mind."
She trailed off at the look in his eyes, and very slowly he glanced down and read the inscription again. The one very old, worn, and rubbed away a little, and the one below it, brand new. For James, with love, from Lily, your best friend. And underneath that,
"For Harry, with love from Hermione, your best friend."
"I hope you don't mind," she said again, and Harry's eyes flew up, dark and a little incredulous. "Mind?" he said, a faint, ragged edge to his voice. Words seemed to have failed him entirely. He put his arms out, and she went into them with a feeling of relief, as if she were shedding a heavy burden. His hands stroked her back, and she could hear them whisper against the satin of her dress. And then they were on her bare skin, and she tilted back her head and reached up to take his glasses off.
and he kissed her. At first she was aware only of Harry's mouth on hers, his hands sliding down her sides to grasp her waist and pull her more firmly against him, the sweet taste of him and the steady, uninterrupted pounding of his heart. Kissing Victor, kissing Ron, had never felt right. Kissing Draco was like visiting some beautiful and distant country, terrifying in its foreignness. Kissing Harry was coming home. It was the music she heard first, rising around them, piercing in its sweetness and distinctiveness. Utterly beautiful. Phoenix song. She pulled away from Harry, whispered against his lips, "You hear that?" He nodded and tightened his arms around her. "Like the first time," she said a little wonderingly, and looked up as something brushed her face. It wasn't snowing this time. Instead, gazing up, she saw something she had never seen before or could have imagined. The stars, brilliant as diamonds, seemed to be detaching themselves from the black velvet of the night sky and fluttering downward, surrounding her and Harry in a cage of sparkling light. She knew it was an optical illusion, just as the snow had not been real snow, but it was, nevertheless, heartbreakingly beautiful. The stars, each the size of a fingernail and a brilliant silver gold, piled themselves at her feet, lit on her shoulders, tangled themselves in Harry's night-black hair. She looked at him, his eyes like green jade, following her own gaze upward. "How do you do that, Harry?" she whispered. He shook his head, looking somehow younger without his glasses on, more handsome, but less familiar. "I don't know. It's just what I feel." "It's beautiful," she said, then held his glasses out to him. "Can you see properly?" she asked in a voice that shook a little. He smiled then. "I can see you, and that's all I need to see." And he took her hand again and pulled her against him. This time she abandoned herself completely to kissing and being kissed by Harry, and didn't even notice when the falling stars were replaced by hooting baby owls. Draco did not know how long he stood in front of the fading fire, silent and blind to everything around him. When he finally raised his eyes from the fireplace, golden diamonds of shock danced in front of his vision. Lucius was alive. Not only was he alive, he was close by. Had seen Draco at his gravesite, heard his angry and rebellious words, and had probably been laughing to himself the whole time. Blindly, Draco crossed the room and leaned against the desk that had been his father's, where Sirius had sat earlier that day. Propped against the corner of the desk was the sword Sirius had given him for his birthday. He reached out and laid his hand lightly on the silvery pommel. The workmanship on the sword was slender and delicate, some of the finest he had ever seen. Sirius refused to tell him where he'd gotten it. The blade was surprisingly strong, and yet looked barely 2 millimeters thick. The sides of it were carved with a pattern of black roses, which were reproduced on the scabbard, complete with elaborate thorns. Along the hilt were 2 enameled words in Latin. Terminus est. Hermione had told him that this meant, "This is the line of division." He let his hand trail down to the scabbard. It was supposed to prevent the spilling of his blood. It might do that, but it would never protect him against his father. Nothing could. A noise at the door snapped him out of his trance. He looked up, dazed, and saw Albus Dumbledore, a serious look in his blue eyes. "Mr. Malfoy," said the headmaster quietly, "I was wondering if I might have a moment of your time." Mutely, Draco nodded, still in a haze, and released the hold on the sword. "You don't seem to be enjoying the party," said Dumbledore, coming more fully into the room. "I'm just tired, Professor." "Yes, one would imagine you might be." Dumbledore came to stand near the fire. Draco edged away to give him room.
Might I ask who that girl was who came with a message for you? Draco turned swiftly and saw the headmaster's sharp blue eyes on him. You saw her? Dumbledore nodded. One of the Singapore Malfoys, if I'm not mistaken. I recognized the poppies. How did you know she gave me a message? It was obvious she was at the party merely because of you. She sought you out across the dance floor, and as soon as she had danced with you, she vanished. Girls seek me out all the time, Draco felt compelled to point out. It hardly makes this a red-letter day. It's refreshing to see that your vanity is intact. I'm sure girls do seek you out, as you say, but girls who bear the dark mark? Draco started slightly. I didn't see you hadn't borrowed a pair of Fred and George Weasley's X-ray specs. Draco almost smiled. So those things really do work. Now Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. I think they work extremely well. He sobered then, and his expression darkened. What was in the message she delivered? Draco looked down. The truth, and probably some lies, he said, then took a deep breath. Headmaster, my father is alive. Draco held his body tensed for the headmaster's reaction, but there was none. Yes, said the other mildly. I rather thought he might be. There was a silence then, in which only the crackling of the fire broke. There's more than that, Draco said finally, and turned to meet his own reflection in the mirror. Over his shoulder, he could see the headmaster watching him. He's in service to Voldemort, and glad I killed Slytherin. He said I'd taken care of the only wizard who could possibly have been an impediment to the Dark Lord's rise. Did he now? Dumbledore was looking at the fire, his face impassive. What does that mean to you, Draco? Draco leaned forward until his forehead was resting against his clenched fist on the mantel. That nothing I do is right, that whatever part of Harry still remains with me, whatever that voice is that says to struggle and not to waver and to do what's right, it doesn't work. Not for me. I told Slytherin once that you can't do good with powers that come from hell. I thought I was doing the right thing, and all I did was clear a path for the Dark Lord's rise. Only if you chose to look at it that way, said the headmaster, his voice clear and steady. Or you could look at it like this. Salazar Slytherin was an immensely evil, immensely powerful sorcerer. Unopposed, he would, without doubt, have conquered the wizarding world, and the death toll and destruction would have been immense. You prevented that. In any case, the battle against Slytherin was yours to fight. The battle against Voldemort, that is Harry's. But if I had known, what would you have done differently? At what point could you have stepped aside? Life is not easy, Draco. The past tempts us, the present confuses us, and the future frightens us. No choice is simple, and no one can know what the future holds. Do you think that Harry knew that sharing the Triwizard Cup with Cedric would result in his death? Did Sirius know that when he trusted Peter Pettigrew it would mean the death of James and Lily? What matters is that one fragile moment, the moment of choice. If what you choose was right, no one and nothing can take that from you, not even the uncertainty of the future. Draco didn't lift his head, but felt a slight resettling inside himself, as if a weight had shifted. There's one other thing, he said, something I don't understand. Slytherin said that I shouldn't have been able to fight him, and for a long time I couldn't. I couldn't fight the pull of the sword, couldn't act against it, and then, suddenly, I found that I could, just after I killed the Manticore. Something happened that made me able to act against him.
Even after he put the dark mark on me, it should have been impossible, shouldn't it? Slytherin said I must be, defective somehow. Only if love is a defect, said Dumbledore. Draco turned his head. What do you mean? I mean that evil like Slytherin's, evil like that which prompted his acquisition of that sword, evil like that which the sword itself is made up of, doesn't understand love, can't grasp it. And in losing its grasp, it lost its hold over you. If Slytherin says you are defective, it was because you were created to be what he was, a windowless room. What happened between you and Harry, the link that was forged by the potion, cut a window into that darkness. Now you can look out and see the stars. Consider that a defect if you wish to. I do not. But I saw myself, Draco whispered, his voice steady but harsh. I saw the mirror of judgment. What I really am. There is no mirror of judgment, said Dumbledore, his voice sharp now. For the son of such a cynical family, you're awfully trusting. Slytherin lied to you. There was a mirror made at the same time as the mirror of Erised, to be its twin. When you look in it, you see not what you most desire, but what you most fear. That is not reality. Those are the black terrors of your own mind. Dumbledore shook his head. You've lived a short life, Draco. In that short life, you've been many things. Spiteful, foolish, have even hurt others, and been silent when you should have spoken out. But you've changed. No mirror that does not reflect the profundity of that can change is a true reflection of what you are. If you can't see it, then trust the reflection you see in the eyes of your friends. What do they see when they look at you? What does Sirius see? What does Miss Granger see? What does Harry see? I think you know the answer to that. Draco swallowed hard against something that had been blocking his throat for what seemed like a long time. He turned, straightened his shoulders, then looked down at his hand, where the signet ring glittered against the pale skin. I wanted to tell Harry about my father, he said, but it's his birthday. I can't do it now. If I tell Sirius and my mother, it might wreck their wedding plans. But I should, Draco, said the headmaster, putting a hand on his shoulder. You told me. That's all you need to do. Trouble will come at its own time. There is no need to run towards it. Right now, there's a party going on just outside this room. Go to it. Enjoy yourself. Be with your friends. Draco nodded and went to the door. The headmaster watched the boy as he crossed the room, and the firelight striking cold silver sparks from his hair, looking so much like Lucius. But whether Draco was meant for a greater good or a greater darkness, Dumbledore could not be sure. There was no way to be sure. He could only wait. It was just after midnight, and Harry sat amongst a pile of torn-away wrappings in the downstairs drawing room. The party was still going on in the ballroom, although at a fraction of the crowd and volume it had been earlier. Only a few guests were left. Percy and Honoria were snogging at a table near the windows, and Angelina and Jana were looking bored while they watched Fred and George leap in and out of a magical fountain Mad-Eye Moody had conjured up during a brief fit of good humor. Fleur and Bill had vanished. Lupin had been forced by Sirius to accompany Narcissa's friend, Heidi, to her London flat. Hagrid was asleep and snoring loudly in the corner. Arthur and Molly had long ago apparated home, and now only the family remained. Narcissa and Sirius, Ron and Ginny, and Harry and Hermione, grouped around the dying fire, oohing and eyeing over Harry's birthday presents. Ginny had given Harry an ancient Gryffindor galleon from the Weasley cellars. Narcissa a fancy new broomstick case, and Sirius had given him an invisibility cloak to replace the one destroyed by Slytherin. Setting the new cloak aside, Harry unwrapped Ron's gift, a round black ball with a clear glass window cut into it. "What is this?" asked Harry, amused. "Not sure," said Ron with a smile. "Dad had it stashed away amid his Muggle collection. I wasn't sure what it was, but it looked like something that might give you a laugh. I think you're supposed to ask it a question or something, and shake it up to see the answer. At least that's what the instructions said." Ginny giggled. "Ask it something, Harry." Harry smiled. "Will I get into trouble with the invisibility cloak Sirius gave me?" Everyone gathered round to see the words form in the glass window. "Of course you will, Harry." Ginny pealed with laughter, and Ron plucked it out of Harry's hand and examined it thoughtfully. "Is Honoria really wearing leopard skin underwear?" he demanded. "Not at the moment," said the ball. "Gracious," said Hermione. "It really does work, doesn't it?" As everyone crowded around giggling, Draco looked up and over at Harry. "Potter," he thought, "can I talk to you for a second?" Harry looked up over Ron's bent head. "Well, here." Draco had stood up, quiet as a cat, and backed away from the group. He crossed the room to the far wall and turned back to face Harry. "Over here, just for a second." Harry got to his feet, extracting himself without much trouble from the giggling group, said something quietly in Hermione's ear, and came over to stand near Draco. Draco watched him as he crossed the room, and thought to himself with no little surprise that Harry did seem different somehow. He had given so much thought to how recent events had changed him, and had not thought how they might have changed Harry. There was an air of sadness about him now, a melancholy sorrow that Draco both empathized with and felt responsible for. "What is it, Malfoy?" asked Harry neutrally, once he was within speaking range. He leaned against the window next to Draco, his hands in his pockets, a small smile on his lips. "You look a bit dire." "Birthday present," he said, and held out his hand and the object in it to Harry. "What's this?" Harry asked, looking down, the smile on his face fading to be replaced by a look of blank curiosity. "Is that a pensieve?" Draco nodded mutely. "Yes," he said finally. "It has my memories in it. Memories of dying. Memories of your parents. The ghosts, anyway." Harry stiffened, and his face went blank, smooth, and unreadable. Feeling that he had made a horrible mistake, Draco said nothing. He glanced over at the others, who were still playing with the magic 8-ball, and paying the boys no attention at all. Surely Hermione wouldn't have let him go ahead with this if she thought that Harry would... "Your memories?" Harry echoed faintly. "Of my... parents." Draco's hands suddenly felt slippery with sweat. "I know it's not an ordinary sort of birthday present," he said. "Hell, it's not an ordinary sort of anything. I'd have given you this, though, even if it wasn't your birthday. You have a right to it, Potter. You should have been the one down there, not me." "Ah," said Harry, and the ghost of a smile flitted across his face. "So I should have been the one who died, then?" Draco unclenched his hands. "You know that's not what I meant." He looked more closely at Harry. "But I know if you could go down there and come back, you would go." Harry reached out and took Draco's gift, eyes dark. "I know. I don't know when I'll be able to look at this," he added, with perfect honesty, his hand tight on the rim of the pensieve. "No," said Draco, and looked back at his reflection in the dark window. The image in the glass was shadowy, and he could make out the outline of his own face, the curve of cheek and chin, the grooves at his temples. "But you have the right." "Yeah," said Harry, "I guess I do." "You won't like everything you hear and see," said Draco. "No," said Harry, "I don't expect to, but this makes it better. Nothing can fix what I said to you. said Draco. Maybe, said Harry. Maybe not. Draco looked down at his hand where it rested on the windowsill. Harry followed his gaze and noticed with faint surprise the heavy onyx ring that swallowed up Draco's slender finger. He didn't remember seeing it before. A belated birthday present, perhaps? What about next year? He said suddenly. Draco was lost. Next year? Next school year? Back at Hogwarts? Are we friends there or not? Do we talk to each other? Ignore each other? Pass in the hallways without speaking? Is that what you want? No, said Harry. Everyone knows we're going to be brothers, Draco said simply, and saw Harry react to it anyway, his eyes flashing a darker green for a moment. I suspect, he continued, that they all assume we're suffering rather horribly over that fact. Harry thought for a moment. We're team captains against each other next year. The Gryffindor-Slytherin rivalry is very important to both houses, and let's face it, we're the figureheads for it. Plus, everyone in my house will look funny at me if I start hanging about with you. And as for you, I don't even like to think about what the Slytherins will do to you if you start hanging about with me. It will probably involve some kind of a scaffold, said Draco. I'm afraid there's nothing for it, began Harry. We'll have to fake it. Draco looked lost again. Fake it? Fake what? Hating each other, of course, said Harry. Can't let everyone down, can we? But we'll know we don't hate each other. Right, said Harry with a grin. You're mad, Potter. So says the Daily Prophet, agreed Harry. Of course, that was because you told them I'd drool. Oh, right, said Draco with a begrudging smile. I guess it won't be that hard to fake it, will it? Criminally easy, I suspect. So, do we still get to hit each other? I want to be clear on the rules. Pull your punches, Malfoy. That's all I'm asking. And no unforgivable curses. Draco grinned. That's a pretty cunning plan there, Potter. For Gryffindor, I know, Harry finished for him. Draco didn't say anything. Harry looked at him and saw that his gaze was locked on a spot across the room. He followed Draco's line of sight to the fireplace, where the rest of their companions were grouped around it. Sirius sat beside Narcissa on the long sofa, the firelight bringing out the laughter in his dark eyes and sparkling on the beating of her dress. On the carpet by the fire sat Hermione, her head bent over the magic 8-ball, her right hand loosely playing with the topaz charm around her throat. The line of her profile was pure and clean and lovely in the shadowy half-light, and her mouth was curved into a smile. Next to her sat Ron. His eyes were blue and full of laughter. Ginny sat at his feet, her hair turned to flaming amber by the firelight, her hand on Hermione's shoulder as she giggled. They were happy, and the happiness radiated out from them like a wave, touching Harry and Draco where they stood on the outskirts, drawing them in. As they both gazed, Hermione glanced up from the ball and smiled, as if it was perfectly natural to see them standing and gazing like that, then returned her eyes to the small glass window. Harry turned sideways, looked at Draco, and saw a small half-smile playing around the corners of his mouth. Malfoy, he said, what are you looking like that for? For a moment, Draco didn't respond. His eyes were calm, but nevertheless filled with a strong and indefinable emotion. Then the look faded, and he turned to Harry and smiled, a genuine smile, with happiness in it, and not a little mischief. I'm finally looking at it, Potter, he said. What? Asked Harry. My happy memory. And that is all for book 2, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. So the third book is a slog. It is incredibly long. So I am going to have to take my time going through it and making sure that all my edits are correct before I present it to you guys. So I'm assuming that might take all the month of May to do. So there is a little bit of a intermission that is going to be coming up for this. It's still in the same series. It's just a little offshoot of stuff that I actually took out from this story and managed to make its own kind of mini story. It has to do with the founders. So I will be putting that up next month to kind of tide you guys over while I work on the big lump that is the last story, the last book that is. So yeah, guys, thank you so much again for following me here. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel if you have not. I have a Patreon, which has my personal writings on it and my spicy artwork as well. But if you are not interested in that, I also have a Ko-fi. If you could check either or both of those out, I would very much appreciate it. Thank you so much and have a good night.